Boa tarde. Sejam todos bem-vindas e bem-vindos à Casa da Amazônia Brasileira, o nosso espaço do Consórcio Amazônia Legal. No momento, vamos dar abertura para o último painel do dia, que foi organizado pela Baia, intitulado Agricultura, regenerativa e carbono na América Latina, desafios e oportunidades para a ação climática. Eu vou passar a palavra para Emily Fellows, do World Business Council for Sustainable Development.
Hello. So now I've learned two more words in Portuguese. Agricultura, regenerativa. I think that sounds pretty good. Thank you. And I'm only going to say buen dia, although it's not really buen dia. Is that okay? Okay, that's going to be pretty much all of it. But it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for organizing this session, Bayer, and I'm really glad to be joined by this esteemed list of panelists. So my name is Emmeline Felus. I work for the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, joined by my colleague here, Kate. I'm going to give you a few minutes of introduction about regenerative agriculture, because although everybody uses the term, there is still a bit of discrepancies about what we mean. And thereafter, I'll be turning to our speakers to try and get different points of view from different types of stakeholders, but also more of a political, financial, value chain angle. So, regenerative agriculture, I feel that it's a new term of what we used to call, for the old people like me, 25 years ago, we called sustainable agriculture. The only difference is maybe the level of ambition. When we say sustainable, it means you can sustain it. When we say regenerative, it means that you're regenerating within the farm and around the farm. I think that's a little bit of the difference. It's nice to be a bit more ambitious. We like to say that if we're going to get really regenerative agriculture to scale up, we need an aligned way of talking, measuring, and rewarding for regenerative agriculture. So what the BBCSD has done with one of the projects called OP2B over the last 18 months has been to coordinate a group of 1,100 companies and stakeholders to agree on 11 outcomes and 10 metrics for what is regenerative agriculture, making sure that in the end we measure biodiversity levels, climate, basically greenhouse gas emissions, soil health, farmer livelihoods. We often forget about this. And now what we need to do, and my colleague Kate, who is here, can talk to you afterwards about it, is really make the link to MRV, so measurement and verification as well, and reward, because that's the missing part, of course. Ultimately, we're trying to reward farmers for the good practices that they're doing, for the ecosystem services that they're bringing, on top of the production they're making, the contribution to food security. So, as we're doing that, we know that agriculture is often flagged as being responsible for 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions, 80% of biodiversity loss, but we also know that if we were able to transition 40% of agriculture to regenerative agriculture, we would reach the 1.5 degrees target that we still have in mind, even though it doesn't look so good. So let's double up on this, and then the discussion we're going to have with the panelists is really how do we go about this. Guys, I would love to count on your attention, because what I want to do is make sure we have some time afterwards for questions and for comments, and maybe to learn from you as well. So I know it's late, everybody's tired, but let's try to stick together. All right, so I'm going to turn to my first. So, you know, when I printed out my briefing, one page was missing, and it was half of the speakers. So I wrote it down here. Hopefully I have it right. So we're going to start with Anna Euler, who is researcher at Embrapa. And we'd like to hear, since I talked about measurement, we'd like to hear from you as to how you appropriately measure across regions, because it's quite different, and we know that it's quite costly and difficult today. So how do you go about this first?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank Bayer and the colleagues for the opportunity. It's an honor to be here. I will try to speak in English. I'm better in Portuguese, but as everybody will speak in English, I will do my best. For the ones that don't know Embrapa, okay, Embrapa has 51 years. Like 51 years ago, our challenge was really to change the Brazilian situation from food importer to looking to sovereignty, to food production and sovereignty. We can say that after 30 years, in average, really we could reach this goal. The first challenges of Embrapa at that time were first to produce technology to convert acid soils in fertile soils in order to move the agriculture from South Brazil, that was the main center of food production, to the whole Brazil. Now we produce, okay, was the first step. So the second step was really to adapt. That's why we used to say that we know a lot about adaptation, because we did a lot adapting temperate products and how to say, species to the tropical zone. So, but then was very much product-based research. With the time, we start really to think about sustainability, and we would to say that now our goal and our challenge is like the multi-functionality of the agriculture, right? But to talk about sustainability, it's not something new, and that's why maybe one the difference that we have, that as we have 43 research units spread out through the whole Brazilian territory. So we have data, systematic have been collected along the time. We are designing now like these low carbon protocols. So part of our research now is exactly to modeling, to monitoring, to generate database, exactly to identify standards for these, how to say, food systems and crop systems, and to capture the trends of vulnerable areas, and also to be able to provide subsidies to national, regional, and state policies for adaptation and resilience in agriculture.
So can I ask? Thank you. Can I ask a question? So what I heard from what you said is both trying to get the data, and is it true that getting the data today is very difficult for farmers to measure? Is there proxies, or how do you go about it? And secondly, what is really interesting is you're trying to connect with the policymakers and see how you get subsidies. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, one important thing, like as I said, Embrapa has 51 years, and in our history, we had been more than 80,000 partnerships, and when I say partnerships, formalized partnerships with the productive sectors. From small cooperatives to big companies, such as Bayer, that's here. Bayer, we have almost 3 decades of partnership with Bayer. So the data collection in a serious, how to say, serious and long term, it really depends on such partnerships. Right. Because usually research projects have in average 3 to 4 years of span. So if you do not have really medium to long-term partnership, it's not possible to have systematic collection of data that will make us able to build scenarios, to anticipate the risks, and so on. Another important public policy that I would like to mention is this agriculture climatic zoning risk, how to say, zoneamento agrícola de risco climático. That's the agriculture zoning climatic risk. That is only possible because we have partnership with the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank of Brazil. And then we provide this systematic data and classification of crop systems to anticipate okay, the windows of plantation and harvesting, because this is changing every year,
Right.
with the climate change. So this is one pilot project of Embrapa that became a national and very important policy that nowadays diminish the investment in insurance, in agriculture insurance, in about 9 billion yearly.
That's super exciting. Thank you so much. Thank you. Then I'll turn to you, Daniel. So Daniel Schneider, he's the director of the climate program at Bayer. And if you could please expand a little bit. We just heard about the need for partnerships. We heard about basically research and governments to get some of the public support. But actually, how do we also link throughout the value chain? How do we make the link between carbon capture at the farm level all the way to credits and purchasing as well? Because ultimately, we have to align all of these stakeholders.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Speak up.
First, okay. Do you hear me? Okay, yeah. A bit closer to the mouse. Okay. So thank you so much for having me here. Yeah, let me first of all build upon what has been said. So climate change or climate protection needs partnerships. So that's really a task, or this task we have as human mankind, where we can't go alone. So in all the parts, in all the sectors, we need partnerships. We need partnerships with our suppliers, with our peers, with politics, and with our customers. And that's the most important topic. And on the other hand, so we are talking about removing, avoiding carbon emissions. And that's where we really go to one sector, agriculture, what's account for 25% of the emissions worldwide. And what we want to do here is really to put the farmer into the center of this, because these are the ones which are already facing the climate change. They are facing droughts. They are facing extensive rain, and that's why it's super important to bring these in. But coming back to your question, so what are we doing? So with our Pro Carbono program, it's for us really to help farmers to combine productivity, to combine profitability and sustainability benefits all together in one. So to have a really a triple win situation, to reduce emissions, to have a benefit for the farmer, to give the right incentive, and to have a benefit for us all, really, to reduce the emissions and to help mankind in the end. What are we doing? So we are incentivizing the farmers, and this can be with soil cover, no-till planting, or also with sustainable agricultural practices, so that they can combine these. And to make this sure, we need measurements. So we have already made more than 300,000 measurements in Brazil, and have seen that reduce carbon emissions in the soil by 16% already, and that's by increasing productivity by 11%. So that's you can argue that are not big numbers, but when you bring all these farmers together, then these are huge numbers, and that's what we have to do and scale it up in the future, really, to have the benefit for all of us.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask a provoking question. So I think we have a business case, and I've heard you here. We have a business case when we can show that by producing in a different way, in a more regenerative way, we are able to increase profitability or productivity, as well as to capture more carbon. Yeah. But is there not a limit to where, in fact, it doesn't go together. You start having trade-offs between your productivity and your carbon sequestration. Have you seen that, and how do you go about that?
No, so far we've seen an increase in both.
Right.
So and that's a win-win situation. So with this sustainable practices, it's for us regenerative agriculture is really producing more with less, while reducing carbon emissions, and
Right.
that's really a win-win situation.
Thank you. That was an easy answer then. Okay, perfect. That's really, really nice to hear. Thank you. So now I'm going to turn to, and please everyone, think about if you have any questions or any comment. You try to find a more clever question than me to really trick the panelists. We want to hear from Sean. Sean Frisbee is the Chief Partnerships Officer at LEAF. He will tell you what is LEAF, aside from a really cool acronym. And we would like to hear a bit more about the jurisdictional approach and how that fits into the picture that we just heard from the rest.
All right, thanks. I'm actually going to take a little step back from LEAF, which is something that came later and is about system change at scale, and also a step back in my career to where I started on forest and land use to my experience in Colombia from about 2010. My first assignment for the UK government when I worked there on forest and climate issues was to pick up the Colombia portfolio, which grew to be a very big thing now, the UK-Colombia partnership. But initially, it started with cattle ranching, a $15 million program with the Federation of Cattle Ranchers in Colombia and with the World Bank, called the Silver Pastoral Systems Program in Colombia. Now a little bit more famous, but very unfamous in those days. Just take a look at the Colombian landscape in 2010. It was 40% of the land was cattle ranching land. 28% of the population of Colombia was involved in cattle ranching in some way for beef or for milk production, but it provided just 4% of Colombia's national GDP. That tells you a little bit about the level of intensity and the level of productivity of that production system. So the Silver Pastoral Systems Program was focused on translating the traditional practice of extensive cattle ranching with half a cow per hectare, very unprofitable, not really suitable for the Amazon landscape, into mixed grazing systems with trees interspersed with fodder crops. And it really was tremendously successful. So why? Why would you do this? It brings huge mitigation benefits, which we all think about, obviously, here at the Climate COP, but it's also a massive source of potential adaptation, especially for a country like Colombia, which has one of the highest risks of exposure to extreme climate events. And for the bottom line, it had an enormous impact on the productivity by providing shade for the cattle, by feeding them in the right way, by increasing the water retention in the land. How did the program go about it? It went about it with TA, teaching the farmers how to do it. It went about it with materials, all the traditional things, seedlings and fencing and all the things that you need to manage a farm more intensively and to restore forest on the land. And then eventually payments for ecosystem services as well. And the outcomes were huge in carbon terms. I was even more staggered by the biodiversity outcomes. Some of the farms had 3 times more birds. They were absolutely, completely transformed. And by the effect on the bottom line. So the farmers on average were making an additional $1,500 per hectare per year from an agroforestry system on their farms, a silver pastoral system on their farms, compared to a normal, extensive Colombian cattle ranch. Now, the challenge with this is how to mainstream it and how to scale it up, and that's where we really face the challenge. So you need big nurseries with trees in all of the regions that did not exist. You need many more trained TA partners that are available to farmers, and most of all, that lovely $1,500 I talked about, that came after about 5 or 6 years. The first 4 years, you had a negative cash flow, so you needed finance. And these farmers didn't have collateral. Some of them didn't have banking, and a lot of them didn't have land title. So you need land regularization as well, something which Brazil is a world leader on, and Colombia is now learning from. And so this brings me to my last points, really, and why leave. You need the systemic drivers of change that work with governments to bring in these kinds of organizing principles, nurseries and de-risking of credit lines, and actually de-risking credit lines, registering land. This requires government intervention. It can also be accelerated through supply chain interventions like the ones that Bayer is supporting. And so that's why at the LEAF Coalition, in my new role, we're very focused on how we can bring carbon financing to governments, as well as to projects which can nest within and under LEAF Art Trees programs, how we can bring rigorous wall-to-wall monitoring of the performance of whole states or countries to reduce deforestation, and as they do, help them to access very significant payments from the private sector for the carbon reductions and for the carbon removals to then distribute into regenerative agriculture, IPLC programs, and forest protection efforts as well.
That is really interesting because throughout the week, I've heard mostly about the need to find finance and to get the flow of finance. They're really funny working. Bring the flow of finance to the farmers. And you're saying that in the project that you've been involved in, you are looking at bringing the finance to the government. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? And then I will move to you, Mohamed.
Yeah, well, it's more than that. It's about the accountability level being at the system, being at the government level. The monitoring is at that level. In order to access the finance, there has to be a strategy at a jurisdictional scale. There has to be a plan. There has to be implementation in which policies are changed and implemented, in which agreements are made with local communities for how they will receive funding.
Right.
And in that way, when you have all of the actors pulling together for that outcome at the large scale, we find from experience, and there are many experiences of this, for example, Acre in Brazil is a great example of this over many years, where the government working with local industry, working with local communities, is the right way to really scale up these kinds of forest-friendly industries or regenerative agricultural practices.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very clear. So we'll move to our last panelists, and then we will take comments or questions. So our last panelist is Mohamed Ibrahim. He's director. Okay, I'm going to try with my Brazilian accent again. Director de Cooperação Técnica, ICA. Correct me. We would like to hear you a bit more about. We've heard a lot about partnerships. So can you elaborate a bit more about that, please?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. ICA is an institution that works in the whole of Latin America and the Caribbean. So you can understand that when you discuss the theme about regenerative agriculture, we're working in a very heterogeneous context. The southern cone, very different than the Caribbean region, where you have, in terms of scales, and also the agroecological settings that we have. In Central America also, the landscape is much different in terms of the soils and the variability that you have. These are main discriminating variables if you look at how do you improve this and what are the strategies that you're going to work on. So ICA has been working in terms of within the context of regenerative agriculture. We have built an alliance and partnerships working in terms of generating more knowledge in the context of soil health, and we have a program referred to as Living Soils, which is supported with Professor Ratan Lal, who's the World Food Prize winner, in cooperation with Bayer, with PepsiCo, with Syngenta, and other key stakeholders, for us to generate more knowledge about the aspects of living soils. And also we understand if we invest in living soils, improving the soil health for productivity, ecosystem services, but also advancing in the objectives of the mitigation goals for the mitigation of climate change. So we have been implementing several of the programs in the whole of Latin America and the Caribbean, providing support to the government in terms of developing the policies within the NDCs and the strategies for biodiversity. How do you work in improving the soil health and being part of the solution for the NDCs that they are proposing. So many of the countries now have been retooling their NDCs to include agriculture as a part of the solution towards the objectives of climate change. So we also have a program on bioeconomy, which is looking more at bioinputs with an emphasis on biofertilizers. And there are good examples, for example, in Brazil, in Argentina, where we are supporting the regulatory frameworks. We think that that's an area we have to strengthen. We need to look at standardization of the commodities and the products that we are using for applications. That's been a problem also. But also in terms of stable supply that we're going to have. Embrapa has been working recently, has been in a presentation where the new methods for biological nitrogen fixation in grasses, be it legumes or no legumes, as an example of those are the bioinputs that have been having impacts at scale in terms of impacts in productivity, but also in impacts in reducing the emissions from avoiding emissions from inorganic fertilizers, but also enhancing the soil fertility that we have. So,
Mohammed, can I interrupt you just a second? Because you talked about bioeconomy, and I'm trying to wake up people in the audience. Can somebody lift their hands if they can give me a definition for bioeconomy? Because I don't yet understand fully what it is. Does one of you know what is bioeconomy? Otherwise, we're going to ask Mohammed. So you've heard bioeconomy, right? It's like the new term that Brazil is after. Okay, the new term. Okay, great. So, Mohammed or maybe Anna, do you want to give us your understanding or your definition, because it's not clear to me?
Well, it's simply the use of the biological material and biomass. So you convert this into more of an economic or losing or circular economy that we work on. For example, we have seen in the sugarcane industry now where you're not only producing sugar but also producing bioenergy, but also using these materials for biofertilizers, etc.
So bioeconomy is the whole sector, the whole field of economy that is based on organic mass, if you want, and wanting to put efforts into making the most use of it. So you talk about circularity. Is that what it is? Anna, you want to chime in?
Yes, it's just because Brazil in the G20 just proposed a new initiative on bioeconomy.
Right.
In general, you have one political approach and one scientific approach. In terms of scientific approach, we have three big areas of bioeconomy: biotechnology, bioresources, and what we call in Brazil social bioeconomy. Right? It's a transition for a new economy that will decarbonize. But just to finish, that I think that's very important, under the Brazilian leadership, the discussion, we didn't aim to agree in terms of a concept, but in terms of a principle. So the G20 countries, plus all the countries invited, so they agreed in the final of 10 principles for bioeconomy.
Okay.
So should guide countries in the sustainable development, should be inclusive, should promote biodiversity regeneration, should consider gender and generation aspects. So I really would like to invite people that do not know much about bioeconomy to go after the 10 principles that were agreed by the G20 this year.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you for your patience, Mohammed. Please go on.
Yeah, so those are the work that we are doing in terms of also providing support in designing the climate finance, de-risking climate finance for farmers. And I will follow up on the context of the silvopastoral systems, because the project in Colombia was a follow-up from a pilot project from the GEF project, which I coordinated in Colombia, Costa Rica, and Nicaragua. And very happy to know that it was moved from a pilot towards the national level. Now, in terms of the initial investments, now we are working in Honduras with the NAMA facility for scaling up at a national level, where farmers will have access to affordable credits and with a guaranteeing mechanism, and also having a gender context where women can also have access to affordable credits, and using the offset for carbon, payment for carbon to pay off the credits that we're having as a way of advancing in more blended finance towards promoting more sustainable practices. In Costa Rica, we have advanced in the NAMAs for coffee, the NAMAs for livestock, with the National Appropriate Mitigation Action, that's what NAMAs mean, and using soil as a main component, and regenerative soil, regenerative coffee. Costa Rica has already advanced in terms of exporting the first batch of coffee, which is zero deforestation free, but also in the carbon neutrality, using the soil context of regenerative soil within an example of how they're moving to policy. But here is where the private sector also played an important role. Is the private sector or the Institute for Coffee are playing an important role in terms of promoting policies, but also providing the extension services, use of digital tools, but also helping the farmers to manage the risk factors, which is very important.
Thank you. You've covered a lot, and thank you for explaining what's this concept and how we go about it. I heard you talk about the link. When we talk about partnerships, you talked about the link to climate finance, the digitalization, and indeed, how do we measure, to close the loop with what we're talking about, how do we measure at the farm level, how do we make it affordable, and ultimately channel the finance to whomever needs it, either through the governments, local government, or the farmers as well. I've warned you many times, guys. You've been sitting here very quietly. So now is your chance to either provide us some examples of what you're doing, or comment or ask a clever question. And I want a question that is a tricky one, not an easy one. Okay? Does anyone have a comment or a question?
While they sing,
we have two. Okay, so we have this gentleman here and this lady here. Oh, actually, 3 questions. Can we start with the gentleman over there? Sorry, and then we'll go to you in here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Please, can you say your name and your organization?
Okay, my name's Phil Paxton. I'm from Canada, and I'm in ornamental horticulture.
Speak closer.
Ornamental horticulture. So in regenerative agriculture, we're doing quite a lot of work with cover crops, which we don't get paid for. Now, your bioeconomy theory, how in that environment would cover crops become a cash crop if you're actually using bioeconomy as a way of generating other income, and it's doing the work of carbon collection or carbon sequestration? So how does that work? I'm still struggling with that from a finance point of view.
So are you saying that today the cover crops that you're using, you're not being able to find a buyer, or there is no financial compensation, or financial, you can't basically get a market for it? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I've never heard of anything for a cover crop, that there would be any payment for cover crop. That's the whole point of differentiating cover crop from cash crop. That's what I'm trying to understand. Really?
Okay. Very interesting. Yeah. Does anyone want to?
Yeah, I can take this. Yeah. To be honest, so cover crops, you can, under certain schemes, you can combine with other practices, not solely, but combined with other sustainable practices, you can make carbon credit out of it. And on the other hand, cover crops can bring us to sustainable aviation fuel in the future. Still, there's
exactly what I had in mind.
That is a way, but this is the aviation sector is really in need for solutions, and cover crops can help us really to scale this up.
Thank you. Maybe you can have a follow-up discussion, because that's also what I've heard. I've heard that now increasingly some farmers are using cover crops that actually help produce biofuel, so they can generate some of this cash. But you probably can have a more detailed follow-up discussion. Thank you. Shall we move to this gentleman here, and then Arbe, your colleague? Can you say again your name and organization?
Yeah. Thank you very much for the interesting topic, and sorry I joined late. I'm Payman. I'm CEO of Allozyme. We are building the fastest enzyme engineering company, actually, based in Singapore. So I'm very much familiar with bioeconomy because we are enablers. We are partnered with a larger organization, and in less than a year, we build a solution, which is a microbe or an engineered enzyme for them. One thing that I learned, which I would like to actually understand if that's the same concept in your measurement, is not necessarily converting from chemical or other methods to biology going to reduce the carbon emission. In some cases, in fact, is increasing it, while everyone thinking like moving to fermentation is reducing it. And what I want to ask is, do you really establish measurement techniques that when you do this technical transformation, you can judge you are moving towards the positiveness for the carbon capture or even negativeness?
Thank you. That was very clear. Anna, you want to take this one up?
Actually, I would like exactly to add for my first questions, what are the methodologies or how we are doing that? So Embrapa has developed some technologies that in partnership with the private sector that now are available exactly to measure carbon in soil, like using photomics for really speeding up the results from measuring the carbon stocks in the soil. So then you can set a baseline and then really accompany along the time. And then also a new methodology for soil biological analysis and using enzymes. Okay, using some enzymes. So it's kind of a clinical soil health test. That's pretty new. Now we have already 30 different labs in Brazil that are credentiated, I don't know, that had the technology transfer and are doing that. That's exactly to moving beyond, because in the past, or mostly of the soil tests are only for chemical or physical quality of the soil. So then it's going deep to the biological activity of the soil. And some new technologies are coming in this sense. But again, coming back to the principles of bioeconomy, that's why more than concepts, we believe in principles, and that not only it's not only the simple transformation from chemical to bio, and especially for, I would say, especially for the South Global, there are other issues, especially when we deal with our capacity to reduce deforestation, to include people, and to reduce, inequality. So when we talk about bioeconomy, necessarily we are bringing more than concept, but these principles. But sometimes you can, in some systems, diminish the emission, but producing in the regional or national scale, you're more inequality, or you are not really considering empowerment of women and bringing opportunities for this agriculture transition to the youth generation. So is this bioeconomy? We are really hitting the target that we want in terms of the whole sustainability. So I agree with you. Maybe in this transition, we can think in a short, medium, and long-term transition. In the first stage, maybe you, and in certain cases, and then I will just finish my speech talking about our big strategies in the Ministry of Agriculture. That is the recovery of 30 million hectares of degraded pasture.
Okay, are we sure about this number? Because I've heard over the last week, 20, 24, and 30 million hectares.
No, 30 million hectares.
That Brazil Minister of Agriculture wants to restore.
The Brazilian government, through the Minister of Agriculture,
wants to restore.
30.
Sounds like an auction, because I heard 20 and 24, now 30. Okay, so we believe it's
officially, 30. But then the representatives of the minister is here, but it's 30. And then and what I mean we have to change management practice. And then the cover, how to say, vegetation that you said, like cover crops are very important to restore the soil health. But in the end of the day, what I want to say is it's not in the small term. You need to have finance in the medium term, because in order to provide small, medium, and big producers to change their practice. And in the beginning, the reduction of emission doesn't come in the beginning of the implementation system. It comes in the middle term. So we must have a medium-term vision in order to really do us in a sustainable way.
Thank you so much. This was a very, very clear. Thank you for your question, and thank you for the answer as well. Anna, I think we'll take a very last comment or question, and maybe everybody would like to have a drink or just a little snooze. But yes, please, you wanted to add?
So thank you. I'm Catarina from Brazil. I wanted to ask a little bit, as a Brazilian, I'm very, very proud and very confident of the transformation that agriculture can do, but I know that it has to go beyond agriculture, right? Because when we're thinking about the carbon emissions within agriculture, we have the diesel of the truck that the farmer has to use in order to purchase his inputs, or we have the transportation for commodities exportation. So we have a lot of other sides of the value chain which have a challenge in abating the carbon it generates. So it's hard to talk about a carbon neutral product in agriculture because of the challenges that go beyond agriculture. So my question would be, and for all of you, if we have the time to take it, what are the opportunities that we have cross-sector, right? And that can go within generating credits, that can go within what practices we are doing for fuels, for example, which then go back into the system of agriculture. So what do we have in collaboration with other sectors? Or what can we build in collaboration with the other sectors that will have like the full circle of agriculture?
Thank you so much. That's a very exciting way of widening the discussion and in the end actually trying to get to some of the center of the problem. I'll move around the panelists maybe to see who wants to answer, and maybe if you have a 30-second closing words you want to say as well. So we start in this order here, okay?
Great. That's a great question. Thank you. I'll go right back to that example of the silvopastoral systems program. So one of the main things that farmers needed to do in order to increase the productivity of the dairy sector was they needed refrigeration on a major scale, right? So this is absolutely right. There is intensification of agriculture involved in protecting forests and restoring soils, and that has an energy and a transport cost. So we do need to think about the wider system, and actually at Emergent, one of our dreams is one day maybe when we really have cracked how to work on systems change for forests, to start thinking about forests and agriculture and energy in the same jurisdictional way, because we feel that the same systemic approaches can be applied, and we need to look at the whole system.
And the words of everybody? Okay. So I just also, beyond the principles of bioeconomy, I would like to share with you the principles for sustainable agri-food systems that Brazil have assumed and is trying to spread throughout the world. So it's like respect as, how to say, the baseline. And when we say respect, we say resilience, efficiency, science. And in terms of science, one of our big challenges now is really how to finance a long-term research system, I guess, especially in Global South. Because when we talk about, I'm a forester, so it's very, very challenging to find finance for long-term research on forestry. And when we're talking integrated system of crops, livestock, and forest, and forestry or forest, the F is always the last one, because we don't have much information, data, and support for this long-term research. So respect, resilience, efficiency, science, people in the center, and when we talk in people, especially small farmers, in Brazil we are 5 million, not only farmers, 5 million properties. That means much more farmers. 4 million are small or medium. they need training, they need finance, they need support and technical assistance that nowadays, I think it's a challenge for the whole Latin America that we do not have and we should support. So then energy, like agriculture, to think in this energy transition, as was said, now agriculture as part of this energy transition and really getting, as you said, of this complementarity, the commitment and fair trade, because to impose barriers to the South Global is something that should be rethink, because in the end of the days, more than barriers, we need incentives. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was very clear. I'm not sure of the two acronyms. Respect versus LEAF is the most exciting, but they're both pretty good. We'll move to Mohamed, and thereafter we'll finish with Sean.
Your question is more about a life cycle assessment that you need to do and quantify the emissions. If you talk about dairy or livestock, 80% of the emissions on the farm level. So what you use different segments. We know that many of the farmers, small scale, what we've been working in, for example, in Costa Rica, which has been one of the countries that have been championing the whole debate about climate change. Many of the farmers are using biogas for pasteurization of the milk and whatever, and now transforming into more bioenergy for the transport. So I think it's a process. They're moving in the pineapple cultivation, for example, which has been on the discussion of the European Union in terms of the green pineapple platform. They are now using the pineapple residues for bioenergy as one way of conversion, as a way of transitioning beyond the farm level. So I think there's much more to do, but it's a step in the right direction.
Thanks for the super concrete example. Thank you. And Daniel, you're going to be last but not least.
Yeah, it's hard to add much more here to my fellow panelists. I started saying that agriculture is 25% of global emissions, but agriculture is not the problem, is the solution. So because we have solutions on hand for other sectors. So regarding biofuels, what we have, the sustainable aviation fuel, I'm super optimistic that agriculture will pay in really a lot in the upcoming years. On the other hand, bioeconomy, like bioplastics, so avoiding oil and plastics. So that's agriculture can play really a significant role, despite having hard to abate emissions. That's for sure. But in total, agriculture really has a possibility also to bring in its part for the net zero world.
Thanks so much for these very wise closing words. Thank you, Bayer, for organizing this panel. Thank you, everyone. And I wish you a good evening.
Thank you.